I'm Madison Parker, 19, and I've been building apps since I was 14. While my family dismissed my computer games as a waste of time, I quietly turned my bedroom coding sessions into something extraordinary. At every family dinner, they'd roll their eyes when I mentioned my projects. My older brother got praised for his college grades, my sister for her internships, but my innovations, just Madison's silly phase. The betrayal wasn't just their dismissal, it was discovering they'd been secretly sharing my ideas with their friends' kids, claiming credit for inspiring me. But when TechCorp's acquisition offer arrived, everything changed. That $3 million check didn't just validate my work. It exposed years of family manipulation I never saw coming. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, this story will resonate deeply. Subscribe to hear how I turned dismissal into triumph. It all started with a hand-me-down laptop. I was 14, sitting in my bedroom in suburban Minneapolis, when my older brother Jake tossed his old Dell onto my bed. "Here, maybe you can use this for homework," he said, already focused on his shiny new MacBook Pro, a graduation gift from our parents. That beaten-up laptop became my world. While Jake was getting praised for his acceptance to Northwestern and Emma was being celebrated for her high school achievements, I was hunched over that flickering screen, teaching myself Python from YouTube videos. The fan whirred constantly, and sometimes the screen would go black for no reason, but I didn't care. I had found something that made sense to me in a way that nothing else ever had taught my parents. Robert and Linda Parker owned a successful accounting firm in downtown Minneapolis. They were practical people who believed in traditional paths to success. Good grades, good college, good job. When they saw me spending hours on what they called computer stuff, they'd exchange those looks, the ones parents give each other, when they're worried about their kids' priorities. "Madison, you need to focus on your real subjects," Mom would say, glancing at my report card. My grades weren't bad, mostly B's with an occasional A in math, but they weren't Jake's street. A's are Emma's honor roll status. Computers are fine as a hobby, but you need to think about your future. But I was thinking about my future. Every night, after finishing homework and enduring family dinner conversations about Jake's economics major or Emma's student council presidency, I'd retreat to my room and code. I started with simple programs, a calculator, a basic game where you guessed numbers. Nothing revolutionary, but each small success felt like discovering fire. The real breakthrough came 6 months later. I'd been working on a simple app that helped students organize their homework assignments. It wasn't sophisticated, just a basic planner with reminder notifications, but it worked. I showed it to Emma, thinking maybe she'd find it useful for her busy schedule. She glanced at my laptop screen for about 3 seconds. "That's nice, Madison. Hey, can you help me with my calculus homework later?" That was it. No questions about how I built it. No curiosity about the hours I'd spent debugging. The notification system, no acknowledgement that her 14-year-old sister had created something functional and useful. Just a dismissive smile and a request for help with her real schoolwork. I should have been discouraged, but instead I felt more determined. If my family couldn't see the potential in what I was doing, I'd prove it to them. I just had to figure out how. That night, I created my first GitHub account and uploaded my homework app. I named it StudySync, though it would be years before anyone in my family would take that name seriously. The download counter sat at 0 for weeks, but I didn't care. I had built something real, something that solved a problem, and that laptop, my gateway to a world my family couldn't quite understand, had made it all possible. Looking back now, with everything that's happened, I realized that moment marked the beginning of 2 parallel lives. The one where I was Madison Parker, the overlooked middle child with mediocre grades and strange computer hobbies, and the one where I was becoming someone else, entirely someone my family had no idea existed. The wall in our living room told the story of our family's values better than any conversation ever could. It was Mom's pride and joy, a carefully curated gallery of achievements spanning 3 children's lives. Jake's academic awards dominated the center. Dean's List certificates, honor society memberships, his Northwestern acceptance letter in a silver frame. Emma's accomplishments flanked the right side. Student council certificates, debate team trophies, her National Honor Society induction photo, and then there was my section. A single frame containing my 8th grade participation. Certificate from the school science fair. Not even a winner's certificate, just proof that I had shown up. Every family gathering became a performance where I played the same role. The quiet one, the creative one, the one who was finding her way. Relatives would coo over Jake's internship at a Chicago finance firm, or Emma's acceptance to 3 different colleges, then turn to me with those sympathetic head tilts. And how are you doing, Madison? Still playing around with computers? Playing around. As if the hundreds of hours I spent learning programming languages and building applications were equivalent to a child's finger painting, I'd nod politely, mumble something about enjoying it, and watch the conversation quickly shift back to my siblings' LittleLensYT achievements. The pattern was so established that I almost didn't notice how deeply it had shaped our family dynamics. Jake, 21 and confident, had learned to expect praise and attention. He'd call from college with updates about his classes, his job interviews, his social life, and our parents would put him on speakerphone so we could all participate. In celebrating his latest success, Emma, 18 and driven, had internalized the lesson that achievement equals love. She managed her schedule like a campaign manager, stacking extracurriculars and leadership positions with military precision. Every conversation with her was an update on her latest triumph or a strategy session for the next challenge. And me, I had learned to be invisible. The night I finished my first major app, more sophisticated version of StudySync that I'd spent 3 months perfecting, I made the mistake of trying to break the pattern. It was a Sunday dinner, and we were all gathered around the kitchen table. Jake was home for the weekend, regaling us with stories about his economics professor who used to work on Wall Street. Emma was describing our plans for senior class president. During a brief lull in the conversation, I cleared my throat. I actually finished something pretty cool this week. It's an app that helps students manage their study schedules, and I figured out how to integrate it with most schools' online systems. I think it could actually help a lot of people. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like minutes. Mom looked up from her meatloaf with that patient smile she reserved for my computer talk. Dad glanced at Jake, as if seeking direction on how to respond. Emma kept scrolling through her phone. "That's nice, honey," Mom finally said. "Speaking of school, Jake, tell us more about that internship application you mentioned." And just like that, the conversation moved on. My months of work, my breakthrough in solving a complex integration problem, my growing vision for what the app could become, all of it dismissed with 2 words. That's nice. But Jake's casual mention of maybe applying for an internship? That warranted 15 minutes of discussion about networking strategies and resume building. I sat there, pushing meatloaf around my plate, feeling something harden inside my chest. It wasn't just disappointment. I was used to that. It was recognition. For the first time, I saw our family dynamics with complete clarity. Jake and Emma weren't just my siblings. They were the golden children, the ones whose dreams mattered, whose futures were worth investing in. And I was the placeholder, the one who filled space at the dinner table until the real children had something to say. That night, after everyone had gone to their rooms, I stood in front of that achievement wall for a long time. The photos and certificates seemed to glow in the dim hallway light, each one a testament to what our family considered worthy of celebration. My single science fair certificate looked so small and pathetic in comparison. But as I stared at that wall, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to fight for space on their wall anymore. I was going to build my own wall, my own world, my own definition of success. And someday, though I couldn't have imagined how or when they would have to acknowledge what I had built, whether they wanted to or not, I walked back to my room, opened my laptop, and got back to work. The golden children could keep their wall. I had bigger plans. The first time I made real money from my code, I was 16 and sitting in a PE chemistry, half listening to Mrs. Rodriguez explain molecular bonds while my phone buzzed with payment notifications. StudySync 2.0 had launched 3 weeks earlier, and the modest $1.99 price tag was actually generating revenue $20-7.46. That's what my phone showed when I discreetly checked my developer account during lunch. It wasn't life-changing money, but it represented something I'd never experienced before. Validation from complete strangers who found my work valuable enough to pay for a dot by the end of that week. It was $63. By the end of the month, $212. Real money from something I'd created in my bedroom while my family assumed I was just playing around with computers. I made a decision that day that would define the next 3 years of my life. I wouldn't tell them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Creating a separate bank account at 16 required some creativity. I convinced my parents to let me open a learning account for managing my babysitting money and occasional birthday gifts from relatives. What they didn't know was that I'd also quietly established a business PayPal account linked to that same bank account, using my real information but keeping the business activity completely separate from my personal profile. The money grew slowly. At first, StudySync 2.0 feet second success was modest, a few hundred downloads, mostly from students who found it through App Store searches. But I was learning valuable lessons about user experience, marketing, and customer feedback. Every negative review stung, but I treated each one as a free consultation from a potential customer. More importantly, I was building something my family couldn't see, a systematic approach to creating and monetizing software. I started keeping detailed spreadsheets tracking user acquisition, revenue streams, and development costs. I researched market trends, analyzed competitor apps, and taught myself basic principles of business finance through online courses and YouTube videos. By my junior year, I had expanded beyond StudySync. I created a simple budgeting app for college students, a habit tracking app that gamified daily routines, and a meal planning tool that integrated with local grocery store APIS. None of them were groundbreaking individually, but together they represented a diversified portfolio of digital products generating consistent revenue. The hardest part wasn't building the apps, it was maintaining the facade of being an underachieving teenager while secretly running what was becoming a legitimate business. At family dinners, I'd listen to Jake talk about his business classes and Emma discuss her college application essays, all while knowing that I was generating more monthly revenue than Jake made at his part-time campus job. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. During the day, I'd sit in classes where teachers praised me for finally applying myself when I managed a B+ on a test, then spend evenings managing customer support emails and planning product roadmaps for apps that thousands of people were actually using. My bedroom became a secret command center. I'd installed a small whiteboard behind my closet door where I tracked monthly revenue, user metrics, and development timelines. To anyone casually glancing into my room, it looked like typical teenage clutter clothes, textbooks, that old laptop, still humming away on my desk. But behind the closet door was evidence of something my family couldn't have imagined. Their unfocused daughter was quietly building a real business. The money kept growing. $500 a month became $800, then $1,200. By the spring of my junior year, I was consistently earning more than $1,500 monthly from my various apps. I was 17 years old, sitting in high school classes, earning more than many adults, while my family worried about my lack of direction. I started reinvesting everything back into the business. Better development tools, professional design software, small marketing budgets to promote new releases. I even hired a part-time virtual assistant, a college student in Ohio who helped manage customer support emails for $10 an hour. I was building infrastructure, systems, and processes while maintaining perfect grades in the computer science elective that my counselor had suggested as a good fit for my interests. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family celebrated Emma's acceptance to college business programs while I was already running a business. They praised Jake's economics coursework while I was learning real-world financial management through necessity. They worried about my future while I was quietly creating one they couldn't see. But the isolation was becoming harder to bear. Success without recognition is a strange kind of accomplishment. Every milestone reaching my first 1,000 downloads, crossing $2,000 in monthly revenue, getting my first 5-star review from a user who said my app had genuinely helped. For academic performance, I celebrated alone in my bedroom, unable to share the achievement with the people who should have been proud of me. I started keeping a private journal, partly to track business decisions, but mostly to process the growing disconnect between my public and private lives. The entries from that period reveal a teenager caught between pride in her accomplishments and confusion about why her family's approval still mattered so much. Today's study sync hit 10,000 downloads. I wrote on a Tuesday in March. Emma got praised at dinner for making student council treasurer. I made $247 today from app sales. She got $0 from student council. But guess which achievement our parents will remember? I didn't know it then, but I was building more than just apps and revenue streams. I was developing the independence, financial literacy, and emotional resilience that would eventually allow me to navigate the betrayal I was about to discover. Every month of hidden success was preparing me for the moment when I need to stand completely on my own. That moment was coming sooner than I could have imagined. The discovery happened by accident, the way most betrayals do. I was looking for my phone charger in Jake's room during Thanksgiving break when I saw the text message thread open on his laptop screen. I wasn't snooping, the conversation was. Right there, impossible to ignore, with my app's name clearly visible in the chat. Yeah, my sister Madison built this study app thing called Study Sync. Jake had written to someone named Derek. Pretty cool concept. She's always messing around with code. Gave me some ideas for a project I'm working on for my entrepreneurship class. My stomach dropped. I scrolled up through the conversation, my hands shaking as I read months of messages where Jake casually discussed Madison's little projects as if they were family brainstorming sessions he participated in. He described the core functionality of 3 different apps I built, shared screenshots I'd never given him, and even mentioned specific features I was planning to implement. But it got worse. Derek wasn't just a friend, he was apparently developing his own app based on what Jake had shared about my work. They were discussing user interface designs that looked suspiciously similar to mine. Talking about monetization strategies I'd spent months researching, even planning a launch timeline that would put Derek's version in direct competition with my existing apps. I took photos of the conversation with my phone, my mind racing. When had Jake even seen my apps? I'd never shown them to him directly, but I realized he'd probably observed them during the rare moments when I worked on my laptop in common areas of the house. Or maybe Emma had mentioned them. She'd seen me working on various projects over the years. Even if she'd never shown real interest, the betrayal felt physical, like something cold spreading through my chest. But I forced myself to stay calm, to think strategically. I needed to understand how deep this went before I reacted. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to family conversations. What I discovered was systematic, intellectual property theft disguised as casual family sharing. During a dinner conversation about Emma's college application essays, I heard Mom mention to our neighbor, Mrs. Chun, that Madison has some interesting ideas about educational technology. When discussing Mrs. Chun's daughter's struggles with time management, Dad, it turned out, had been even more direct. I overheard him on a phone call with his business partner, describing my budgeting app concept as something the kids these days are thinking about and suggesting it might be useful for their firm's younger clients. He wasn't malicious about it. In his mind, he was probably just making conversation, but he was sharing proprietary business ideas I'd never given him permission to discuss. The most painful discovery came when I checked Emma's college application essays. She'd written about growing up in a family that values innovation and entrepreneurship, describing how collaborative family discussions about technology solutions had influenced her interest in business. She'd essentially turned my solo work into a family activity, claiming credit for inspiration and creative input she'd never provided. I realized that to my family, my apps weren't real intellectual property. They were conversation pieces, interesting anecdotes they could share to make themselves sound more modern and connected to technology trends. They genuinely didn't understand that sharing my business concepts was theft, because they didn't see my work as legitimate business. In the first place, the Jake situation was the most serious. Through careful observation and strategic questions, I discovered he'd been sharing details about my apps with multiple classmates over several months. Some, like Derek, were actively using my concepts for their own projects. Others were simply impressed by Jake's apparent insight into tech trends and sight he'd gained by stealing from his teenage sister. What made it worse was the timing. Jake was taking an entrepreneurship course where students were required to develop original business concepts. Instead of creating something new, he'd been mining my work for ideas, presenting my innovations as his own brainstorming results. He didn't even mention me in some context, but always as his younger sister who plays around with apps, never as the original creator, whose work he was appropriating. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of conversations, recordings of phone calls where family members discussed my work, copies of emails where they shared my ideas with friends and colleagues. I wasn't sure what I planned to do with the evidence, but some instinct told me I needed proof of what was happening. The hardest part was continuing to act normal during family interactions. Sitting at dinner while Jake described his innovative project concepts to our parents, knowing he was literally describing my work. Listening to Emma talk about her application essays highlighting our family's collaborative approach to problem solving, when she'd never collaborated on anything with me. Watching Mom beam with pride when neighbors complimented our family's tech-savvy kids, without realizing she was accepting credit for my solo achievements, I began to understand that this wasn't just casual sharing, it was a pattern of appropriation that revealed how my family fundamentally viewed my work. To them, my apps weren't Madison's intellectual property. They were family assets, freely available for anyone to discuss, share, or repurpose. They'd never asked permission because they didn't think permission was necessary. My ideas belonged to the family, even if the work was entirely mine. The realization was devastating and liberating simultaneously. Devastating because it confirmed my worst suspicions about how little my family respected my work. Liberating because it clarified exactly what I was dealing with: systematic intellectual property theft by people who didn't even realize they were stealing. I knew I needed legal advice, but I also knew I needed to be strategic about how I handled the situation. My apps were generating serious revenue, now nearly $3,000 monthly across all platforms. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. It was about protecting a legitimate business from family members who were actively undermining it. That night, I created a new document on my laptop: Family IP Theft Documentation. I started with the Jake Derrick conversation and began building a comprehensive record of every instance where my family had shared, discussed, or appropriated my work without permission. I had no idea that within 6 months, that documentation would become evidence in the most important negotiation of my life. The MIT rejection letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, and I've never been more relieved to fail at something in my entire life. Mom found it first, opening the thin envelope while I was at school, and I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table with that particular expression parents get when they're trying to figure out where they went wrong. "Honey, we need to talk about your college applications," she said, sliding the letter across the table. The polite but firm rejection was exactly what I'd expected. My SAT scores were good but not exceptional. My GPA was respectable but not outstanding, and my extracurricular activities were practically non-existent on paper. What admissions committees couldn't see was that I'd been running a successful business instead of joining debate team or student government. "I'm disappointed too," I said, though I was lying. The rejection represented freedom I hadn't even realized I wanted. Over the next hour, Mom and Dad delivered a lecture I'd been dreading for months. I was underperforming academically. I lacked focus and direction. My computer hobby was fine as a creative outlet, but I needed to get serious about my future. Had I considered state schools, community college, maybe a gap year to figure out what I really wanted to do with my life? "Look at Jake," Dad said, gesturing toward the achievement wall. He knew from freshman year that he wanted to study economics. He had a plan. Emma's the same way: focused, driven, clear about her goals. "You're smart, Madison, but you need to apply yourself to things that matter." Things that matter. I almost laughed. While they were lecturing me about lack of direction, my apps had generated over $40,000 in the past 12 months. I was 18 years old with more business experience than most college graduates, but my family saw only what I wasn't accomplishing according to their traditional metrics. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, covering familiar territory about wasted potential and the importance of conventional education. I nodded appropriate intervals, made vague promises about taking my college search more seriously, and privately calculated how much revenue I'd generated while sitting in this kitchen being told I was directionless. The truth was, I'd applied to colleges primarily to maintain the facade of being a normal high school senior. I'd chosen programs I had no intention of attending, written essays about interests I didn't actually have, and gone through the motions of campus visits and interviews while secretly hoping for exactly the outcome. I'd received rejection from, reached schools and acceptance to safety schools I could decline without seeming deliberately. Self-sabotaging. My real plan was taking shape in spreadsheets and business projections they'd never seen. I was generating enough consistent revenue to support myself, and my apps were gaining traction in ways that suggested serious growth potential. College would mean 4 years of learning things I was already applying practically, accumulating debt for knowledge I was acquiring independently, and postponing the business development that was already succeeding. But I couldn't explain any of this without revealing this secret financial life I'd been maintaining for 2 years. And after discovering how freely my family shared my ideas, I wasn't ready to give them more ammunition to appropriate. Maybe Madison just needs to find her passion, Emma suggested when she came home and heard about the MIT rejection. She was 18 now, confident and articulate, already planning her freshman year at the University of Minnesota's business program. Some people are late bloomers. Late bloomer. I was sitting 3 feet away from her, earning more money than our fathers, entry-level employees. But I was a late bloomer because I wasn't following their predetermined path to success. The next few weeks brought a parade of well-meaning advice from relatives and family friends. Everyone had opinions about my situation and suggestions for getting back on track. Aunt Susan recommended looking into trade schools. Our neighbor, Mr. Peterson, mentioned that the local community college had an excellent computer repair program. Mrs. Chen suggested I consider majoring in something practical like accounting, since I seemed to have inherited Dad's head for numbers. Computer repair, as if my coding skills were equivalent to troubleshooting hardware problems. It was like suggesting that Jake become a bank teller because he was studying economics. The pressure intensified as graduation approached. Extended family members asked increasingly pointed questions about my plans. So, Madison, what are you doing next year? Became the dreaded conversation starter at every gathering. I developed a rotation of vague responses, still exploring options, looking at different programs, taking some time to figure things out. Meanwhile, my business was reaching new milestones weekly. StudySync had crossed 50,000 downloads. My budgeting app was featured in a Best Apps for College Students article that generated a surge of new users. I was corresponding with potential partners about integration opportunities and considering whether to hire additional support staff. The cognitive dissonance reached a breaking point during my high school graduation party. Surrounded by relatives celebrating Jake's upcoming senior year at Northwestern and Emma's college scholarship, I stood in our backyard listening to adults discuss my uncertain future, while my phone buzzed with notifications about reaching a new monthly revenue record. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I wasn't going to college in the fall. I was going to focus entirely on building my business, growing my revenue, and developing the apps that were already succeeding beyond my family's ability to comprehend. The MIT rejection had given me the perfect excuse. Instead of declining acceptance offers, I could simply say I was taking a gap year to figure things out after the disappointment of not getting into my dream school. My family would be sympathetic rather than suspicious, and I'd have the time and mental space to pursue what was already working. I drafted a letter that night, not to a college admissions office, but to myself. A promise to spend the next year proving that I'd been right about my path all along, even if I was the only one who believed in it. The MIT rejection wasn't a failure. It was permission to stop pretending I wanted something I'd already surpassed within. 6 months, that decision would lead to the acquisition offer that changed everything. But for now, it was just a teenager sitting in her bedroom, looking at a rejection letter that had accidentally set her free. The idea for Focus Flow came to me during a particularly frustrating study session in the summer after graduation. I was trying to prepare for some freelance coding work while managing my existing apps, but I kept getting distracted by notifications, social media, and the general chaos of trying to concentrate in a house where my family still saw my work as playing on the computer. I tried existing productivity apps, but they all seemed designed by people who'd never actually struggled with focus. They were either too rigid, blocking everything for preset time periods, or too permissive, allowing too many exceptions. That defeated the purpose. What I needed was something adaptive, something that learned my patterns and helped me build sustainable focus habits rather than just imposing arbitrary restrictions. So I built it. The first version was rough, coded primarily for my own use during long summer days when I had the house to myself. The core concept was simple: an AI-powered focus assistant that would monitor my computer usage, learn my productive patterns, and gently guide me back to task when I started to drift. But the implementation was complex, requiring machine learning, algorithms I'd had to teach myself through online courses, and countless hours of experimentation. The breakthrough came when I realized that most productivity apps focused on restriction rather than redirection. Instead of just blocking distracting websites, Focus Flow would suggest specific, productive alternatives based on the user's goals and past behavior. If someone was procrastinating on a writing project by checking social media, the app wouldn't just block Facebook. It would offer a writing prompt, suggest a quick outline technique, or recommend a specific playlist that had previously helped that user enter a flow state. I spent 3 months building the initial version, working 12-hour days in my bedroom while my family assumed I was just avoiding the reality of my gap year. The technical challenges were unlike anything I'd tackled before. I had to create user behavior models, implement natural language processing for goal setting, and design an interface that felt helpful rather than judgmental. The machine learning component was particularly difficult. I needed the app to recognize patterns in user behavior without being invasive, to make suggestions that felt intuitive rather than robotic. I studied academic papers on habit formation, analyzed data from my own productivity patterns, and tested dozens of different algorithmic approaches. My bedroom became a programming cave. I'd installed blackout curtains to reduce screen glare during long coding sessions, and my desk was covered with notebooks filled with flowcharts, user interface sketches, and debugging notes. The walls were covered with printed screenshots showing different versions of the app's interface, creating a visual timeline of its evolution. The first time I successfully tested the complete system was on a Tuesday in September. I'd been working on a particularly complex feature integration for 6 hours straight, and I was starting to lose focus. Instead of taking a break or switching to a different task, I activated Focus Flow to see how it would handle my actual work. Situation. The app monitored my typing patterns, noticed that my productivity had declined, and suggested a 5-minute breathing exercise followed by a specific coding podcast that matched my current project type. The suggestion was so perfectly timed and relevant that I actually laughed out loud. It was like having a productivity coach who understood exactly what I needed in that moment. But building a great app was only half the challenge. I'd learned from my previous releases that user acquisition and marketing required as much strategy as development. I spent weeks researching the productivity app market, analyzing competitor features and pricing strategies, and developing a launch plan that would differentiate Focus Flow in an overcrowded space. The key insight was positioning. Instead of marketing Focus Flow as another productivity tool, I positioned it as a focus training system that helped users build long-term concentration skills. I created content around the science of attention, the psychology of distraction, and the specific challenges facing students and young professionals in an increasingly chaotic digital environment. I launched Focus Flow on a Monday morning in October, pricing it at $4.99 with a free 7-day trial. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, I had over 500 downloads and dozens of detailed user reviews. People weren't just buying the app, they were writing paragraphs about how it had already changed their work habits. The App Store algorithms picked up the engagement quickly. Focus Flow started appearing in featured apps and productivity essentials categories Tech blogs noticed and reached out for interviews. Within 2 weeks, I had over 10,000 downloads and was generating more daily revenue than I'd ever seen from a single app. But the real validation came from user feedback. People were sending detailed emails about how Focus Flow had helped them complete projects, improve their grades, and develop better work habits. A graduate student wrote that it had helped her finish her thesis. A freelance designer credited it with doubling his client output. A high school student said it had transformed his study sessions from chaotic cramming to focused, productive work. The technical infrastructure started straining under the user load. I had to quickly upgrade my server capacity, implement better data management systems, and hire my first real employee, a part-time customer support specialist who can handle the growing volume of user questions and feedback. Revenue exploded. Focus Flow was generating over $8,000 per month within 6 weeks of launch, and the growth curve showed no signs of slowing. I was managing customer support, planning feature updates, and handling business operations that had grown far beyond anything I managed before. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family worried about my lack of direction and my uncertain future, I was building an app that was helping thousands of people become more focused and productive. I was solving a real problem at scale, generating serious revenue, and establishing myself in a competitive market, all from my childhood bedroom. But I still couldn't share the success with the people who should have been proudest of me. Every milestone felt simultaneously triumphant and lonely. When Focus Flow hit 25,000 downloads, I celebrated alone. When it was featured in a major tech publication, I read the article by myself. When revenue crossed $10,000 per month, I had no one to call with the news. My original wireframes for Focus Flow were still pinned to my bedroom wall, hand-drawn sketches that had evolved into an app generating 6 figures annually. Looking at those early drawings reminded me how far I'd come, but also how far I still felt from being understood by my own family. What I didn't know was that Focus Flow's success had already attracted attention far beyond my family's awareness. In startup incubators and tech companies across the country, people were noticing the young developer who'd built something genuinely innovative in the productivity space. One of those companies was about to reach out with an offer that would change everything. Running a growing tech business from my childhood bedroom required more organization than most people could imagine. While my family saw me as an aimless gap year student sleeping in late and messing around on the computer, I was actually managing a complex operation that demanded skills I'd never learned in any classroom. My business journal became my Bible, a leather-bound notebook where I tracked everything from daily revenue to customer feedback patterns to strategic decisions about product development. Each page represented hours of analysis, planning, and reflection that happened while my family assumed I was just avoiding real responsibility. The morning routine I developed was more structured than any office job. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. before anyone else in the house was stirring, and spend the first hour reviewing overnight analytics, responding to urgent customer emails, and checking App Store performance metrics across all my products. By the time my family was having breakfast, I'd already handled the most critical business operations for the day. Customer support had become a science. I'd learned that response time was crucial. Users expected replies within hours, not days. But more importantly, I discovered that thoughtful, personalized responses could turn frustrated customers into passionate advocates. I kept detailed notes on common issues, created template responses that still felt personal, and maintained a database of user feedback that informed every product decision. The financial management was perhaps the most complex aspect. I wasn't just tracking revenue anymore. I was managing multiple income streams, planning tax obligations, budgeting for business expenses, and making investment decisions about infrastructure and marketing. I taught myself basic accounting principles through online courses and YouTube videos, but I was handling financial complexity that most college business majors never encountered in their COURSEWORK. My bedroom had evolved into a command center that would have impressed any startup founder. I installed a large monitor to supplement my laptop, created a filing system for business documents, and established dedicated workspace areas for different aspects of the operation. To casual observers, it looked like a teenager's room with some extra computer equipment. In reality, it was the headquarters of a six-figure business. The networking aspect had been a revelation. Through online communities, developer forums, and social media, I'd connected with other young entrepreneurs, experienced developers, and industry experts who provided guidance and support my family couldn't offer. These relationships were conducted entirely through digital channels, creating a professional network that existed parallel to my family life. I'd started participating in virtual conferences and webinars, learning about market trends, development best practices, and business strategy from some of the most successful people in tech. While my family worried about my social isolation, I was building relationships with mentors and peers who understood my work in ways my high school friends never could. The learning curve was steep and constant. Every challenge from server scalability issues to user interface design problems to customer acquisition strategies required research, experimentation, and iteration. I was essentially getting a master's degree in business and technology through real-world application, making mistakes with actual consequences, and solving problems that affected thousands of users. My approach to competition had become sophisticated. I monitored rival apps constantly, analyzing their features, pricing strategies, and user reviews to identify opportunities for differentiation. When a competing productivity app launched with features similar to FocusFlow, I didn't panic. I used their approach to validate my market assessment and then develop superior implementations that addressed user complaints about their version. The psychological challenges were as complex as the technical ones. Imposter syndrome was constant. Who was I to be building apps that competed with products from established companies? Self-doubt crept in during difficult debugging sessions or when facing negative user reviews. But I'd learned to channel those feelings into motivation for improvement rather than evidence of inadequacy. I developed systems for everything: user acquisition strategies, feature prioritization frameworks, bug tracking procedures, revenue optimization experiments. What looked like playing on the computer to my family was actually methodical business development guided by data analysis and strategic planning. The isolation was both a challenge and an advantage. While I sometimes felt lonely celebrating successes alone, I also had complete autonomy over business decisions. I didn't have to explain or justify strategic choices to skeptical family members. I could move quickly, experiment freely, and pivot when necessary without external interference. My documentation habits had become obsessive, partly from necessity and partly from an intuitive understanding that I was building something significant. Every major decision, every technical breakthrough, every customer interaction was recorded and analyzed. I was creating a historical record of a business built from nothing. Though I didn't yet understand how valuable that documentation would become, the revenue growth was accelerating beyond my projections. Between FocusFlow success and the steady income from my earlier apps, I was generating over $12,000 per month by December. I was 18 years old, earning more than many college graduates, building products that solved real problems for thousands of users. But perhaps most importantly, I was developing confidence that extended far beyond technical skills. I was learning to trust my instincts, to make difficult decisions under pressure, to communicate with customers and partners professionally. I was becoming an entrepreneur in the truest sense, someone who identified opportunities and built solutions, regardless of external validation or support. My business journal from that period reveals someone who was simultaneously proud of her accomplishments and frustrated by the inability to share them. Revenue hit $14,000 this month, I wrote in one entry. FocusFlow was featured in TechCrunch. Jake called from college to ask for money for textbooks. The irony is almost funny. What I couldn't have known was that my systematic approach to documentation and business development was preparing me for opportunities I hadn't even imagined. The habits I developed, the systems I created, and the confidence I built were about to be tested in ways that would validate everything I'd been working toward. In just a few months, someone would recognize the value of what I built from my bedroom. But first, I had to navigate the discovery of just how extensively my family had been undermining the work they couldn't see. I met Sarah Kim through a virtual entrepreneurship meet for young founders. Though I almost didn't join the video call that Tuesday evening in January, I'd been debugging a particularly frustrating server issue with Focus Flow all day, and the last thing I wanted was to spend an hour listening to other people talk about their startups while I couldn't mention my own success. But something about Sarah's bio in the attendee list caught my attention. Founder and CEO of MindBridge Technologies, acquired by Google in 2019 for $47 million. Currently angel investor and mentor focusing on early stage consumer apps. She was only 28, which meant she built and sold a major company before turning 30. I wanted to hear how someone like that thought. About business. The meet itself was typical a mix of genuine entrepreneurs and wannabes. Some impressive presentations and some obvious pipe dreams. But when Sarah spoke about the challenges of scaling consumer apps, I found myself taking detailed notes. She talked about user acquisition costs, retention strategies, and the importance of building defensible competitive advantages concepts I've been grappling with but hadn't heard discussed with such clarity. During the Q&A session, I almost didn't ask my question, but something about Sarah's directness and obvious expertise gave me confidence to speak up. I'm curious about your experience with family dynamics during the early stages of building your company. Did you find it challenging when family members didn't understand or support what you were building? The silence on the call lasted just a moment, but I could see Sarah's expression change on screen. She leaned forward slightly, and when she answered, it felt like she was speaking directly to me rather than the group. That's one of the most important questions anyone can ask, she said. Family dynamics can make or break an early-stage company, especially when you're young and especially when your family doesn't understand technology. I learned some hard lessons about protecting both my intellectual property and my emotional energy during those early years. After the formal meet ended, Sarah sent me a private message asking if I'd like to schedule a one-on-one conversation. Her business card, which she emailed as a PDF, was elegantly simple. Sarah Kim, founder and investor, with contact information and a small logo that somehow conveyed both professionalism and APPROACHABILIT. We talked for 2 hours the following Saturday morning. I was careful not to reveal too much about my specific situation initially, but Sarah's questions were perceptive and her advice was grounded in real experience. She'd built MindBridge while living with family members who constantly questioned her decisions, and she'd learned to protect her work from well-meaning relatives who didn't understand the competitive nature of the tech industry. The biggest mistake I made early on was assuming family members would naturally respect boundaries around my business. She told me I shared ideas freely, discussed strategies openly, and assumed everyone understood that my work was proprietary. It almost cost me everything when a family member casually mentioned my product concept to someone who worked for a competing company. As our conversation continued, I found myself being more honest about my own situation. I described the family dynamics I was navigating, the dismissive attitude toward my work, and my growing success that I couldn't share. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed just how much she understood about what I was experiencing. "Madison, can I ask you something directly?" she said about an hour into our conversation. "Are you generating significant revenue from your apps?" The question was so direct that I almost deflected, but something about Sarah's manner made me trust her. "Yes," I said. "More than most people would expect from someone my age. And your family doesn't know the extent of your success? They think I'm wasting my gap year playing around with computers." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her tone was more serious. "I need to share something with you that I wish someone had told me when I was starting out. Family members who don't respect your work will often not respect your intellectual property either. They'll share your ideas, discuss your strategies, and potentially undermine your competitive advantages without realizing they're causing harm." She went on to describe her own experience with a cousin who had shared detailed information about MindBridge's upcoming features with someone at a competing startup. The cousin had meant no harm. He was proud of Sarah's work and wanted to impress a colleague. But the leak had forced Sarah to accelerate her product timeline and spend thousands of dollars on legal protection she hadn't budgeted for. "The warning signs are usually subtle," Sarah continued. Family members treating your work as conversation topics, sharing your ideas to demonstrate their own tech savviness, or assuming that family success is communal property. If you're seeing any of these patterns, you need to protect yourself now before the damage becomes irreversible. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as she spoke. The text messages I'd discovered between Jake and his friend, Derek, the casual way my parents discussed my interesting tech ideas with neighbors and colleagues, Emma's college essays that had appropriated my individual work as family collaboration. How? Do you protect yourself without destroying family relationships? I asked. That's the hardest part, Sarah admitted. You have to set boundaries without appearing paranoid or ungrateful. You have to protect your work without alienating people you care about. And sometimes you have to accept that family members who don't respect your professional boundaries aren't really supporting your success anyway. She recommended documenting everything, keeping records of family conversations about my work. Screenshots of any sharing or appropriation, evidence of intellectual property discussions. You hope you never need it, she said. But if someone challenges your ownership or tries to claim credit for your innovations, documentation is your only protection. Before we ended the call, Sarah made an offer that would change how I thought about my business. I'd like to stay in touch as you continue building your company. I don't typically mentor individual entrepreneurs, but something about your situation reminds me of my own early experiences. Would you be interested in having monthly check-ins to discuss strategy and challenges? I accepted immediately, though I didn't fully understand the value of what she was offering. Over the following months, Sarah would become not just a mentor, but a strategic advisor who helped me navigate the most challenging period of my entrepreneurial journey. Her business cards sat on my desk for the rest of that week, a tangible reminder that someone in the professional world took my work seriously. But more importantly, our conversation had given me language for what I'd been experiencing with my family. What I'd interpreted as casual disrespect was actually systematic, intellectual property violation that could threaten my business if I didn't address it. That night, I started implementing Sarah's documentation recommendations more systematically. I began recording family conversations about my work, saving evidence of idea sharing, and building a comprehensive record of intellectual property violations. I hoped I'd never need the evidence, but Sarah's warning had made it clear that hope wasn't a business strategy. Within 3 months, that documentation would become the foundation of the most important negotiation of my life. Opening my first legitimate business bank account felt like crossing a threshold I couldn't uncross. I was 19 years old, sitting in a downtown Minneapolis bank wearing my most professional outfitted blazer I'd bought specifically for the occasion, trying to project the confidence of someone who belonged in conversations about business banking and financial services. The account manager, a woman in her 40s named Jennifer, reviewed my application materials with an expression that shifted from polite skepticism to genuine interest as she processed the revenue documentation I'd provided. My apps had generated over $180,000 in the previous 12 months, and the growth trajectory was unmistakable. These are impressive numbers for someone your age, Jennifer said, looking up from the spreadsheets. You've built this entirely independently? Yes, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I started developing apps when I was 14, but the serious revenue began about 2 years ago. Opening the business account required more paperwork than I'd anticipated, but it represented something crucial: complete financial separation from my family. For years, I'd been funneling app revenue through personal accounts that were technically accessible to my parents. Now I was establishing genuine financial independence with business, credit cards, professional banking relationships, and the infrastructure necessary for serious growth. The psychological impact was even more significant than the practical benefits. Walking out of that bank with business checks and my name felt like official recognition of what I'd been building in secret. Madison Parker wasn't just a teenager playing with computers. Anymore, she was the founder and CEO of a legitimate technology company. My revenue streams had diversified beyond what I'd initially imagined possible. Focus Flow was generating over $15,000 monthly and growing, but my portfolio of earlier apps continued producing steady income. StudySync was pulling in $3,000 monthly from loyal users who discovered it years ago. My budgeting app had found a niche with college students and was consistently earning $4,000 monthly. Smaller apps contributed another $2,000, $3,000 monthly, creating a robust foundation of recurring revenue. The numbers were staggering when I calculated them systematically. I was earning more per month than most college graduates made annually, and the growth rate suggested that I crossed $300,000 in annual revenue within the next year. But the financial success was just one aspect of what I was building. I was creating genuine economic independence at an age when most of my peers were accumulating student debt. I'd started reinvesting aggressively in business infrastructure, professional development tools, cloud hosting services that could scale with user growth, marketing automation software, and even a part-time virtual assistant who handled routine customer support queries. These weren't just expenses, they were investments in systems that would allow me to scale beyond what one person could manage alone. The tax implications had become complex enough to require professional help. I hired an accountant who specialized in small tech companies, a decision that felt both adult and surreal. Sitting in his office discussing quarterly estimated payments and business expense deductions, I was acutely aware that I was navigating financial complexity my family couldn't have imagined. My spending habits remained modest despite the growing income. I still lived at home, still drove the used Honda my parents had bought for my 16th birthday, still wore clothes from Target and mall stores. But I was building substantial savings and establishing the financial foundation for complete independence. Whenever I chose to pursue it, the business bank account became a symbol of my separate identity. Every month, I'd receive statements showing growth that told a story my family couldn't see. Deposits from App Store payments, transfers from PayPal, accounts, occasional larger payments from partnership deals or one-time licensing agreements. The numbers represented more than money. They represented validation from thousands of users who found my work valuable enough to pay for it. I started tracking metrics beyond just revenue. User retention rates, lifetime customer value, acquisition, cost, churn analysis. I was learning to think like a serious entrepreneur rather than just a developer who happened to make money from apps. The business account gave me access to tools and services that supported this more sophisticated approach to business development. The psychological shift was profound. For the first time in my life, I had genuine financial security that didn't depend on my family's approval or support. If they decided to kick me out tomorrow, an unlikely scenario, but one that had occasionally worried me, I could afford my own apartment, my own computer equipment, my own everything. Financial independence meant emotional independence in ways I was only beginning to understand, but the isolation was becoming more difficult to bear. Every major milestone reaching $20,000 in monthly revenue, hitting 100,000 total downloads across all apps, signing my first major partnership deal, I celebrated alone. I had no one to call with good news, no one who would understand the significance of crossing important business thresholds. The business account also enabled more strategic thinking about the future. I was no longer just managing month-to-month revenue. I was planning for expansion, considering hiring decisions, evaluating potential acquisitions of smaller competing apps. I was thinking like someone who expected to build something lasting and significant. My accountant had recommended establishing a formal business entity, an LLC that would provide legal protection and tax advantages. The paperwork was straightforward, but the psychological impact was enormous. Madison Parker, LLC was a real company with real legal standing. Not just a teenager's hobby that happened to generate income. The financial reports I generated monthly told a story of systematic growth and increasing sophistication. Customer acquisition costs were declining as word-of-mouth marketing improved. User attention was increasing as I refined app features based on feedback. Revenue per user was growing as I developed premium features and subscription options. I started setting aside money for an emergency fund, something my business mentor, Sarah, had recommended strongly. Cash flow problems kill more startups than competition ever does, she told me. Always maintain enough reserves to survive 6 months without any revenue. For a 19-year-old, thinking about business survival strategies felt both premature and essential. The bank relationship also opened access to business credit, which I used carefully to smooth out cash flow variations and finance larger infrastructure investments. I was building a credit history as a business owner, establishing financial credibility that would support future growth. Most importantly, the business account represented complete ownership of my work. Every dollar deposited was money I'd earned through my own skills, effort, and strategic decisions. No family member could claim credit for this success. No one could diminish it as luck or accident. It was proof of what I built entirely on my own. But as my financial independence grew stronger, the contrast with my family's perception of my situation became more jarring. They worried about my lack of direction while I managed a six-figure business. They discussed my uncertain future while I planned strategic expansions. They assumed I needed guidance while I was already succeeding beyond their experience. The business bank account was more than a financial tool. It was evidence of a parallel life they couldn't see, success they couldn't understand, and capabilities they'd never recognized. Soon, that evidence would become impossible to ignore. I found Jake's college presentation slides by accident, but the betrayal they revealed was anything but accidental. I was helping him move back home for spring break, carrying boxes from his car to his bedroom, when his laptop fell open and the screen lit up. The PowerPoint file was right there. Innovative business models in consumer technology with his name prominently displayed as the author. What I saw made my stomach drop. Slide after slide featured concepts, business models, and even specific features that I had developed for my apps. The presentation was for his advanced entrepreneurship seminar, worth 30% of his final grade, and it was essentially a comprehensive analysis of my work presented as his own research and insights. The title slide read, Original Business Model Analysis, Focus Enhancement Applications, with a subtitle that made my blood boil. Independent Research by Jake Parker. Independent research. He was claiming academic credit for analyzing business models I had created, implemented, and proven successful in the real market. I sat on his bed, scrolling through slides that detailed user acquisition strategies I'd spent months developing, monetization approaches I tested and refined, competitive analysis I conducted to position Focus Flow in the market. Every major decision I'd made in building my apps was presented as Jake's theoretical business insight. The most damaging slide was titled Innovative Features and User Experience Design. It included screenshots of my app screenshots he could only have obtained by downloading and analyzing my work with detailed annotations about why specific design choices were effective. He was literally grading my user interface decisions and presenting his evaluation as original academic work. But the worst part was slide 12, market validation and revenue potential. Jake had somehow obtained detailed information about Focus Flow's download numbers, user retention rates, and revenue figures. Information I had never shared with anyone in my family. The slide presented this data as the result of his market research methodology and projected performance modeling. How had he gotten access to confidential business data? I scrolled through his laptop files, my hands shaking with anger, until I found the answer. A folder labeled Madison Stuff contained screenshots, email forwards, and even recorded phone conversations where family members had discussed my work. He'd been systematically collecting intelligence about my business for months. The recordings were the most disturbing discovery. Audio files of dinner conversations where I'd mentioned challenges with app development, problems with user retention, or ideas for new features. Jake had been recording family discussions about my work, then mining those recordings for business insights he could present as his own analysis. One recording was particularly devastating. It was from a dinner 3 months earlier when I'd been frustrated about a competitor launching a feature similar to one I'd been developing. I'd mentioned my concerns about protecting intellectual property and staying ahead of market trends. In his presentation, Jake had transformed my real-world competitive concerns into a theoretical case study about maintaining competitive advantages in rapidly evolving markets. The academic dishonesty was staggering, but the personal betrayal cut even deeper. My own brother had been treating my business struggles as source material for his college assignments. Every challenge I'd shared, every success I'd mentioned, Every strategic decision I discussed had been recorded, analyzed, and repurposed for his academic benefit. I photographed every slide, every data point, every stolen insight. This wasn't casual idea sharing anymore. This was systematic intellectual property theft for academic gain. Jake was literally earning college credit by analyzing my work without permission. Attribution or acknowledgement. The presentation was scheduled for the following week, according to his email calendar. He was planning to stand in front of his business school professors and classmates, presenting my innovations as his own analytical insights. The professor would grade him on the originality and depth of his business research, never knowing that every insight came from his sister's actual experience building successful apps. I found drafts of the presentation dating back 4 months, showing how Jake had gradually refined his theft to be more sophisticated and less obviously connected to me. Early versions had mentioned a family member's app development, but later drafts removed even that minimal attribution. The final version presented everything as Jake's independent research with no reference to the actual source of his insights. The folder also contained communication with classmates about the presentation. Jake had apparently positioned himself as particularly knowledgeable about consumer app development, offering to share his research insights with other students working on similar projects. He was building academic credibility by distributing my proprietary business knowledge to his entire peer network. The scope of the violation was breathtaking. Jake wasn't just stealing my ideas, he was systematically appropriating my business expertise, market knowledge, and competitive intelligence to enhance his academic reputation. Every strategic decision I made through trial and error, every lesson I'd learned through real-world application, was being presented as his theoretical business acumen. I sat in his room for over an hour, documenting everything I found. Screenshots of slides, photos of data files, copies of recorded conversations. This wasn't just evidence of intellectual property theft, it was proof of academic fraud that could have serious consequences for Jake's college career. But more than that, it was evidence of how my family fundamentally viewed my work. To Jake, my apps weren't real business achievements worthy of respect, they were raw material for his academic success. My struggles weren't genuine entrepreneurial challenges deserving of support, they were interesting case studies for his business school projects. The discovery forced me to confront a painful reality. The dismissive attitude my family showed toward my work wasn't just misunderstanding or generational difference. It was active appropriation disguised as casual interest. They were mining my success for their own benefit while simultaneously diminishing its value in family conversations. That night, I created a comprehensive document cataloging every instance of intellectual property theft I'd discovered. Jake's presentation was just the most obvious violation, the tip of an iceberg that includes systematic sharing of my ideas, unauthorized distribution of my business strategies, and exploitation of my innovations for others' gain. I now had proof of what Sarah Kim had warned me about. Family members who don't respect your work will not respect your intellectual property. The question was what I was going to do about it, and how far I was willing to go to protect what I'd built. The answer would come sooner than I expected. The intellectual property lawyer's office in downtown Minneapolis felt like entering a different world, one where my work was taken seriously and my concerns were treated as legitimate business issues rather than teenage drama. I'd found David Chun through a recommendation from my business mentor, Sarah, who'd insisted that the family situation had escalated beyond what I could handle alone. Intellectual property theft within families is more common than people realize, David explained. During our initial consultation, he was in his mid-30s, specializing in tech startups and IP protection, with an understanding of both the legal and practical challenges facing young entrepreneurs. The fact that you're a minor complicates things, but it also provides certain protections. I brought printed documentation of everything I discovered, Jake's presentation slides, recordings of family conversations, evidence of systematic idea sharing, and detailed records of how my family had appropriated my work without permission. David reviewed the materials methodically, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed just how seriously he was taking the situation. "This is substantial intellectual property violation," he said after reviewing Jake's presentation. Using someone else's proprietary business strategies and data for academic credit constitutes fraud in multiple contexts. The fact that he's your brother doesn't provide legal protection for appropriating your work. David explained concepts I'd never considered. As the developer and owner of my apps, I held automatic copyright protection for my code, user interface, designs, and business methodologies. My family's unauthorized sharing of my proprietary information could constitute trade secret violation. Jake's academic use of my business data without attribution was both copyright infringement and academic dishonesty. The challenge, David continued, is that pursuing legal action against family members creates complications beyond just the legal issues. But documenting these violations now protects your rights regardless of how you choose to address the situation. He recommended a comprehensive documentation strategy that went beyond what I'd already compiled. Official timestamps for all my app releases, formal registration of my business entities, detailed records of revenue and user data, and systematic cataloging of every instance where family members had shared my proprietary information. Your age actually works in your favor here, David explained. Courts and academic institutions take intellectual property theft from minors very seriously. If this goes to formal disputes, your youth emphasizes the severity of what your family has been doing. The consultation revealed legal options I hadn't considered. I could file formal copyright complaints against anyone using my code or business methodologies without permission. I could report Jake's academic fraud to his university, which would likely result in serious disciplinary action. I could demand compensation for the unauthorized use of my proprietary business intelligence, but David also warned about the potential consequences of escalating the situation legally. Family relationships can't be repaired once you file lawsuits or academic complaints. You need to decide whether protecting your intellectual property is worth permanently damaging those relationships. The legal education continued over several sessions. I learned about trade secret protection, the importance of non-disclosure agreements, and strategies for safeguarding proprietary information in competitive markets. David helped me understand that my family's casual sharing of my business insights could seriously damage my competitive advantages if the information reached actual competitors. Information you've shared in family conversations has probably spread beyond your family, David warned. Your parents' business associates, your siblings' friends, extended family members, they've all potentially been exposed to proprietary details about your apps and business strategies. That information could end up with direct competitors. The revelation was chilling. I'd been so focused on the personal betrayal that I hadn't considered the broader business implications. Every casual conversation where my parents mentioned my interesting tech ideas to their professional network could have inadvertently shared competitive intelligence with people who might use it against me. David recommended immediate steps to protect my intellectual property going forward. Formal trademark registration for my app names, copyright registration for my code and user interfaces, and establishment of clear legal boundaries around my proprietary information. Prevention is always cheaper than enforcement, he explained. The most important recommendation was creating a family intellectual property agreement, a formal document that would establish clear boundaries around my business information and require family members to acknowledge my ownership of my work. It sounds harsh, but it protects everyone by making expectations explicit. My consultation notes from those sessions reveal someone grappling with adult legal concepts while still living at home with the people I was considering legal action against. Can I require my brother to withdraw his fraudulent presentation? I asked. What happens if my parents continue sharing my business strategies with their colleagues? David's answers were both empowering and sobering. Yes, I had legal grounds to demand Jake withdraw his presentation and issue corrections to his professors and classmates. Yes, I could require my family to sign non-disclosure agreements about my business activities. But pursuing these options would fundamentally change my relationship with my family in ways that couldn't be undone. The question isn't whether you have legal rights, David explained during our final consultation. The question is how you want to use those rights to protect your business while preserving whatever family relationships you value. The legal education had given me something invaluable. clarity about my rights and options. I wasn't powerless against my family's appropriation of my work. I had legitimate legal recourse, and the documentation I compiled would support formal action if I chose to pursue it. But more importantly, understanding my legal position gave me confidence for the confrontations I knew were coming. I wasn't just an angry teenager upset about family dynamics. I was a business owner protecting legitimate intellectual property rights. The law was on my side, even if my family WSN T armed with legal knowledge and documented evidence of systematic intellectual property theft. I was ready to address the situation directly. The question was whether my family would respect boundaries voluntarily or whether I need to enforce them through formal channels. The answer would depend on how they responded to what I was about to reveal. The email from TechCorp arrived on a Tuesday morning in April, buried among the usual customer support messages and App Store notifications. The subject line was deceptively simple: partnership opportunity, focus flow. I almost deleted it, assuming it was another generic outreach from a marketing company or development firm trying to sell services I didn't need. But something about the sender's email signature made me pause. Rebecca Martinez, Director of Strategic Acquisitions, TechCorp Solutions. Strategic acquisitions, not partnerships, not licensing deals, not marketing opportunities. Acquisitions. The email was professionally crafted but direct. Hi, Madison. I've been following FocusFlow's growth and user engagement metrics with great interest. Our team at TechCorp believes your app represents exactly the kind of innovative approach to productivity technology that aligns with our strategic roadmap. Would you be available for a brief conversation about potential collaboration opportunities? TechCorp Solutions was a name I recognized, a mid-sized technology company, specializing in productivity software for businesses and educational institutions. They developed several successful apps for corporate clients and had recently been expanding into consumer markets. The fact that they noticed FocusFlow, let alone reached out about acquisition possibilities, felt surreal. I spent 2 hours researching everything I could find about TechCorp before responding to Rebecca's email. Their recent financials, their product portfolio, their acquisition history, their leadership team. What I found was encouraging. A profitable company with a track record of successful acquisitions, respectful treatment of acquired founders, and genuine expertise in scaling consumer productivity apps. My response was carefully crafted to sound professional while gathering more information. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for reaching out. I'd be interested in learning more about what TechCorp has in mind regarding FocusFlow. I'm available for a call this week if you'd like to discuss potential opportunities. The phone conversation 2 days later exceeded my expectations. Rebecca was knowledgeable about FocusFlow's specific features, user-based demographics, and market positioning. She'd clearly done substantial research before reaching out, and her questions revealed genuine understanding of what made my app unique in a crowded productivity market. We've been watching FocusFlow since it launched, Rebecca explained. The user retention rates are exceptional. The growth trajectory is impressive, and the approach to adaptive focus assistance aligns perfectly with where we see the productivity market heading. We think there could be significant value in bringing FocusFlow into the TechCorp ecosystem. The conversation was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Rebecca spoke to me as a peer, as someone whose business expertise and product vision deserved respect. She asked intelligent questions about my development roadmap, my user acquisition strategies, and my long-term vision for FocusFlow's evolution. Obviously, this is a preliminary conversation, Rebecca said near the end of our call. But if you're open to exploring acquisition possibilities, we'd love to put together a formal proposal for your consideration. Would that be something you'd be interested in discussing? I managed to keep my voice steady while my mind raced. Yes, I'd be interested in seeing what you have in mind. The formal proposal arrived the following week, a comprehensive document that treated my 19-year-old self as a serious business owner rather than a teenager playing with apps. The initial offer was $2.8 million for full acquisition of FocusFlow, including all intellectual property, user data, and future development rights. $2.8 million. I read the number 3 times to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. For an app I'd built in my bedroom while my family worried about my lack of direction. A major technology company was offering life-changing money. But the proposal was about more than just money. TechCorp outlined their vision for integrating FocusFlow into their broader productivity platform, expanding its capabilities and scaling it to reach millions of users. They saw potential in my work that even I hadn't fully imagined. The due diligence process was intense and educational. TechCorp's team conducted detailed analysis of FocusFlow's codebase, user metrics, financial performance, and competitive positioning. They examined my development processes, my customer support systems, and my intellectual property protections. For 3 weeks, I answered technical questions, provided business documentation, and demonstrated features that showcased FocusFlow's unique capabilities. Throughout the process, I was struck by how seriously TechCorp took my work. Every aspect of my app was evaluated with the same rigor they'd apply to any professional acquisition. My code quality, my user experience design, my business model, everything was assessed as legitimate. Professional work deserving of careful analysis. The most surreal moment came during a video conference with TechCorp's entire acquisition team. Sitting in my childhood bedroom on a call with 8 technology executives, discussing the strategic value of an app I built between high school graduation and my 19th birthday. The disconnect between my physical environment and the professional reality of the conversation was almost absurd. Madison, your approach to adaptive user interface design is particularly impressive, said TechCorp's head of product development. The machine learning implementation for habit formation is more sophisticated than what we've seen from much larger development teams. How did you develop this methodology? I explained my development process, my research into behavioral psychology, my iterative approach to user experience optimization. The team listened with obvious respect, asking follow-up questions that revealed their genuine interest in learning from my work. During those weeks of due diligence, I made a crucial decision. I wouldn't tell my family about the acquisition discussions until I decided whether to accept TechCorp's offer. This was my business, my intellectual property, and my decision to make. Given everything I discovered about my family's appropriation of my work, I wasn't willing to risk having this opportunity undermined by their interference or skepticism. The secrecy was challenging but necessary. I conducted calls with TechCorp from my bedroom, my car, even from coffee shops when privacy at home was impossible. I reviewed contracts and financial documents while my family assumed I was just browsing the internet. I was negotiating the most important business deal of my life while maintaining the facade of being an aimless gap year student. After 2 weeks of consideration, I responded to TechCorp with a counterproposal, $3.2 million with additional performance bonuses tied to user growth metrics over the following year. I also requested the option to continue as FocusFlow's primary developer within TechCorp's structure, maintaining creative control over the app's evolution. Rebecca's response came within 24 hours. We accept your terms. When would you like to finalize the agreement? I was 19 years old, sitting in my childhood bedroom, and I just negotiated a $3.2 million acquisition deal for an app my family had never taken seriously. The irony was almost overwhelming, but the validation was profound. Someone understood the value of what I'd built, even if my own family couldn't see it. Now, I had to decide how and when to reveal the success to the people who'd spent years dismissing my work as playing around with computers. The conversation I'd been avoiding was about to become unavoidable. The family intervention happened on a Sunday evening in May, though it took me several minutes to realize that's what I was walking into. I'd been called to the living room for what Mom described as a family discussion about Madison's future, which I assumed would be another lecture about college applications or career planning. Instead, I found my parents, Jake and Emma, arranged in a semicircle around the coffee table, with a single chair positioned facing them like I was about to be interrogated. The formal setup immediately put me on guard, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. Madison, we need to talk about your computer activities, Dad began, his tone more serious than I'd heard since my last report card discussion. We've been doing some research, and we're concerned about what you've been doing online. Research, My stomach dropped as I realized they'd been investigating my business activities. But how much had they discovered, and what did they think they knew? Mom pulled out a manila folder. Apparently, they prepared materials for this conversation and began reading from what looked like printed emails and website screenshots. We know you've been running some kind of online business without telling us. We found information about apps with your name on them, and frankly, we're worried about the legal and financial implications. The betrayal was immediate and complete. They've been spying on my online activities, probably monitoring my computer usage or tracking my internet history. Everything I worked to keep private had been compromised by my own family's surveillance. Additionally, Jake added, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when he wanted to sound like an adult, we think you might be getting in over your head with things you don't understand. Business development, legal contracts, financial management, these are complex areas that require experience and education. Emma nodded in agreement. We're worried that you're being naive about online business practices. There are a lot of scams targeting young people, and some of what we've found looks suspicious. I sat in that chair, listening to my family discuss my business activities like I was a child who'd been caught playing with dangerous tools. They discovered my success and interpreted it as evidence of poor judgment and dangerous naivety. The irony was staggering. They were staging an intervention to protect me from the very achievements they've been appropriating for their own benefit. We've prepared some recommendations, Mom continued, consulting her folder like she was delivering a corporate presentation. First, we think you should be more transparent about your online activities. No more secretive computer work. Everything should be discussed with the family so we can provide guidance and support. Transparent. After discovering how they'd systematically stolen and shared my ideas, they wanted me to provide even more access to my proprietary business information. Second, Dad added, we think you should consider bringing in some adult supervision for any business activities. Maybe Uncle Mike could help. He has experience with small business management. Uncle Mike, who owned a single landscaping truck and had never used a smartphone app in his life, was being proposed as supervision for my technology company that generated more revenue than his entire operation. Finally, Jake said, we think you should focus on more traditional career development. Maybe take some business classes at the community college, get some real-world experience through internships, build a foundation of legitimate business knowledge. Legitimate business knowledge. I was managing a 6-figure technology business while Jake was earning college credit by plagiarizing my work, but he was lecturing me about legitimate business experience. The folder Mom had prepared contained more than just evidence of my online business activities. They'd compiled what looked like a comprehensive dossier on my work, screenshots of my apps, printed customer reviews, copies of revenue reports they'd somehow accessed, even printouts of my conversations with business mentors and potential partners. Where did you get this information? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm while my mind raced through the implications of what they'd collected. That's not the point, Dad replied dismissively. The point is that you've been hiding significant activities from your family, and we need to ensure you're making responsible decisions. We love you, Madison, Emma added, her tone taking on the patronizing sweetness she used when she wanted to sound caring. But you're 19 years old with no business education, no real world experience, and no adult guidance. What you're doing online might seem successful now, but you could be setting yourself up for serious legal or financial problems. The intervention continued for another hour, with each family member contributing their concerns and recommendations. I was told I needed supervision, transparency, traditional education, and adult guidance. Every aspect of my business success was reframed as evidence of dangerous independence that needed to be curtailed for my own protection. But the most revealing moment came when Jake presented what he called our family business development plan. He prepared a proposal for how my apps could be properly managed with family oversight, strategic guidance from my parents' business contacts, and collaborative development that would leverage everyone's strengths and expertise. They weren't just concerned about my business activities, they wanted to take control of them. The intervention was actually a hostile takeover disguised as family concern. They discovered my success and decided it needed their management to be legitimate and sustainable. We think this could be a great opportunity for family collaboration, Mom explained enthusiastically. Your technical skill combined with Jake's business education and Dad's professional experience could create something really substantial. Family collaboration. After systematically stealing my ideas and undermining my intellectual property, they wanted to formalize their appropriation by positioning themselves as partners in my business. I listened to their entire presentation without arguing, taking mental notes about everything they revealed about their surveillance, their misunderstanding of my business, and their plans to control my work. By the end of the evening, I had a clear picture of exactly what I was dealing with. A family that had discovered my success and decided it belonged to them. We'd like you to think about what we've discussed, Dad concluded. This isn't punishment, it's an opportunity for growth and family collaboration. But we need your commitment to transparency and responsible decision-making going forward. I agreed to consider their recommendations, promised to be more communicative about my activities, and expressed appreciation for their concern. Then I went to my room and began planning how to protect everything I built from the people who claimed to love me but were actively trying to appropriate my work. The acquisition offer from TechCorp was no longer just a business opportunity, it was an escape route from a family that had revealed their true intentions. The intervention had clarified exactly what kind of support they were offering, and I wasn't interested in accepting it. Now I had to decide whether to finalize the TechCorp deal before revealing it to my family, or whether to use the acquisition as leverage in the confrontation that was obviously coming. Either way, the secret phase of my business development was over. The question was whether the next phase would include my family as supportive relatives or as people I'd had to legally protect myself against. I signed the TechCorp acquisition agreement on a Thursday morning in June, sitting in my lawyer's office downtown while my family assumed I was at the dentist. The final negotiated price was $3.2 million, with performance bonuses that could add another $800,000 over the following 8 months. At 19 years old, I had just become financially independent beyond anything my family could have imagined. The signed contract felt weightless in my hands, just paper and ink, but it represented validation that was profoundly heavy. Someone had recognized the value of what I built in secret, work that my family had dismissed as playing around with computers. The document made it official. My bedroom coding sessions had been worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. Kept the acquisition secret for 3 days, savoring the private knowledge while my family continued treating me like an unfocused teenager who needed their guidance and supervision. During those 72 hours, I finalized my strategy for revealing the news and prepared for the confrontation that would inevitably follow. The revelation happened on Sunday evening, during what had become our regular family dinner. Jake was home from college for a few days. Emma was between her summer job shifts, and both parents were relaxed and talkative. The setting was perfect for what I had planned. I have something to share with everyone, I announced during a lull in conversation about Jake's summer internship prospects. I've made a decision about my business activities. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. They were probably expecting me to announce that I'd accepted their recommendations for family oversight and traditional business education. Emma looked up from her phone with mild curiosity. Jake appeared ready to offer whatever guidance he thought I needed. I've decided to accept an acquisition offer for FocusFlow, I said, keeping my voice steady and matter-of-fact. TechCorp Solutions is purchasing the app for $3.2 million with additional performance incentives over the next 18 months. The silence that followed lasted approximately 10 seconds, but it felt like several minutes. I watched my family's faces process what I'd said, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief to something approaching shock. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Dad asked, leaning forward as if he hadn't heard correctly. TechCorp Solutions is acquiring my app FocusFlow for $3.2 million, I repeated, pulling out a copy of the signed acquisition agreement. I finalized the deal on Thursday. Mom stared at the document like it might disappear if she looked away. "Madison, is this real?" "It's real," I confirmed. The first payment transferred to my business account yesterday. $2.1 million immediately, with the remainder paid over 12 months based on user growth targets. Jake's face had gone completely pale. You sold an app for $3 million? Yes. Emma was the first to recover her voice. How is that possible? I mean, congratulations, but how? I prepared for this question. FocusFlow has over 150,000 active users, generating consistent monthly revenue. KekCorp recognized its growth potential and strategic value for their productivity platform expansion. The questions came rapidly after that, each family member trying to understand how their directionless daughter and sister had secretly negotiated a multi-million-dollar business deal. How long have you been working with this company? Dad asked, his accountant's mind immediately focused on practical details. They approached me 6 weeks ago. The due diligence process took about a month, and you didn't think to mention this to us? Mom's voice carried a mix of hurt and bewilderment. I wanted to wait until I had made my decision, I replied. This is my business, and I felt it was important to evaluate the offer independently. Jake was still staring at the acquisition document. Madison, do you understand what this means? $3 million is more money than most people make in their entire careers. I understand exactly what it means, I said quietly. It means that the work you've all been dismissing as playing around with computers was actually building something valuable. The comment hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time in the conversation, I could see recognition dawning. In their faces, not just about the money, but about what my success implied about their treatment of my work. We never dismissed your work, Emma protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Really? I pulled out my phone and began reading, from notes I prepared. 3 weeks ago, Mom told Mrs. Chun that I was still figuring out what to do with my life. Last month, Dad suggested I consider community college to get some real business experience. Jake, your exact words 2 months ago were that I needed to stop playing around and focus on my future. Each quote landed like an accusation, and I could see my family struggling to reconcile their past dismissiveness with the present reality of my success. But Madison, Dad said, his voice taking on the reasonable tone he used when trying to regain control of a situation, you have to understand our perspective. You're 19 years old with no formal business education. How are we supposed to know you were building something this significant? You could have asked, I replied simply. You could have shown interest in what I was actually doing instead of assuming it was worthless because it didn't fit your definition of legitimate work. The conversation continued for another hour, with my family alternating between congratulations and attempts to understand how they'd so completely misread my situation. But I could see something else happening, a recalculation of my value within the family dynamic. Suddenly, my opinions mattered. My business insights were worth hearing. My plans for the future deserved consideration. What are you planning to do now? Jake asked. And for the first time in our lives, he was asking for my guidance rather than offering his own. I'm considering several options, I said, enjoying the reversal of our typical dynamic. I might start a new company or pursue angel investing in other young entrepreneurs. I'm also thinking about establishing a foundation to support dismissed innovators who need financial backing for their ideas. Dismissed innovators. The phrase was carefully chosen, and I could see that my family understood its relevance to their treatment of my work. Madison, I hope you know how proud we are of you, Mom said, her voice carrying an emotion I couldn't quite identify. This is an incredible achievement. But her words felt hollow after years of dismissal. Pride offered after success was revealed wasn't the same as support provided during the struggle. Recognition given after external validation wasn't equivalent to belief shown during uncertainty. I appreciate that, I said carefully, but I think it's important to admit this success happened despite, not because of, the family environment I was working in. The comment created another uncomfortable silence. I could see my family grappling with the implications of what I'd said, that their lack of support hadn't just been unhelpful, it had been actively discouraging. What do you mean by that? Emma asked, though her tone suggested she suspected what I was getting at. I mean that for the past 5 years, I've been building something significant while being told I was wasting my time. I've been solving real problems for thousands of users while being advised to focus on practical pursuits. I've been generating substantial revenue while being lectured about needing adult supervision for my computer hobby. Each statement was factual and delivered without anger, but the cumulative effect was devastating. My family was confronting the reality that they had been wrong about me in fundamental ways, and that their wrongness had been harmful rather than merely misguided. The acquisition documents sat on the kitchen table between us, tangible proof that their assessment of my work had been completely inaccurate. But more than that, it was evidence that success could happen without their approval, understanding, or support. "Madison," Dad said finally, "if we've been unsupportive, we're sorry. We genuinely didn't understand what you were building." "I know you didn't understand," I replied, "but the question is whether you were interested in understanding or whether you were more comfortable assuming my work was unimportant." That question would hang over our family relationships for months to come. The acquisition had changed everything: my financial situation, my independence, and my family's perception of my capabilities. But it had also revealed truths about our dynamics that couldn't be undone by congratulations or retroactive pride. The $3 million was just money. The real value of the acquisition was the clarity it provided about who had believed in my work when it mattered, and who had only recognized its worth after someone else validated it. Now I had to decide what to do with that clarity. The confrontation I'd been planning happened 3 days after revealing the acquisition. Once the initial shock had worn off and my family had started asking more detailed questions about my business, I'd spent those days preparing not just emotionally, but practically organizing evidence, consulting with my lawyer, and writing down key points I wanted to address. This wasn't going to be an emotional outburst. It was going to be a systematic presentation of facts. I called another family meeting, using the same formal tone Dad had employed during their intervention a few weeks earlier. "I need to discuss some serious issues that have come to light during my business development," I announced. "Please plan on about an hour for this conversation." The speech I prepared was printed and organized in a folder, much like Mom's intervention materials had been. I titled it "Intellectual Property Violations and Family Boundaries," and I began reading from it as soon as everyone was seated in the living room. Over the past several months, I've discovered systematic appropriation of my intellectual property by family members. I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I want to address these violations directly and establish clear boundaries going forward. The confused glances between my parents, Jake and Emma, told me they genuinely didn't understand what I was talking about. In their minds, casual family sharing of ideas wasn't intellectual property violation. It was normal family behavior. "Jake," I continued, turning to my brother, "let's start with your advanced entrepreneurship presentation titled Innovative Business Models in Consumer Technology." I pulled out printed slides from his presentation, watching his face go pale as he recognized the materials. "You presented my business strategies, user acquisition methods, and product development approaches as your own academic research. You used proprietary data about my app's performance without permission, and you claimed academic credit for analyzing business models that I created and implemented." Jake started to speak, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished." "You recorded family conversations about my work without my knowledge, mining those recordings for insights you could use in your college assignments. You shared my business information with classmates, positioning yourself as an expert in consumer app development based on stolen intellectual property." I handed him a legal document my lawyer had prepared. "This is a formal cease and desist notice requiring you to withdraw your fraudulent presentation, issue corrections to your professors and classmates, and stop using my proprietary business information for academic purposes." The room was completely silent. Jake stared at the legal notice like it might burst into flames. "Mom, Dad," I continued, turning to my parents, "you've systematically shared my business concepts with professional contacts, neighbors, and friends without my permission. You've discussed my proprietary strategies at social gatherings, mentioned my innovations and business contacts, and treated my intellectual property as family conversation topics." I pulled out a list I compiled over months of documentation. "Here are specific instances. Dad, you discussed my budgeting app concept with your business partner, Mr. Williams, on March 15th. Mom, you shared details about my user acquisition strategies with Mrs. Chun on April 3rd. You've both treated my work as casual conversation material while simultaneously dismissing it as unimportant. Dad's face was flushed with what looked like embarrassment and anger. Madison, we were proud of your work. Sharing it with friends isn't stealing, it's family support. Sharing proprietary business information without permission isn't support, I replied firmly. It's intellectual property theft that could have damaged my competitive advantages and given unauthorized access to my business strategies. Emma was next. Emma, you wrote college application essays claiming partial credit for my innovations. You described collaborative family discussions about technology solutions that never happened, and you presented my individual work as family projects that influenced your academic interests. I handed her another document. This is a formal request that you issue corrections to any academic institution where you've claimed credit for my work, and that you acknowledge the misrepresentation in your application materials. Emma looked stunned. Madison, I was just trying to show that our family values innovation. I wasn't trying to steal credit from you. Intent doesn't change the impact, I said. You used my achievements to enhance your academic applications, without permission or attribution. The evidence presentation continued for another 20 minutes. Screenshots of conversations, recordings of family discussions, copies of academic work, documentation of idea sharing. I had built a comprehensive case that revealed the extent of my family's appropriation of my intellectual property. The pattern is clear, I concluded. You've systematically treated my work as family property while simultaneously dismissing its value. You've shared my ideas, used my concepts for your own benefit, and appropriated my innovations without permission or acknowledgement. Mom was the first to respond, her voice shaking with what sounded like hurt and disbelief. Madison, we're your family. Everything we did came from love and pride in your work. Love and pride don't justify intellectual property theft, I replied. And if you were truly proud of my work, you would have respected my ownership of it, instead of treating it as material you could freely appropriate. Jake attempted to defend himself. Madison, I never meant to hurt your business. I just thought your ideas were interesting enough to discuss in academic context. You thought my ideas were interesting enough to earn college credit by analyzing them. I corrected. You built academic credibility by presenting my work as your own research, and you shared my proprietary information with classmates who could potentially compete with me. Dad's response was the most telling. Madison, you're overreacting. Families share ideas, that's what families do. This legal paperwork and formal language is unnecessary and hurtful. Families support each other, I replied. They don't steal from each other, even when the theft seems casual or well-intentioned. The fact that you see formal boundaries as unnecessary and hurtful shows exactly why this conversation is needed. The meeting continued for another hour, with each family member alternating between apologies, justifications, and attempts to minimize the significance of what they'd done. But I could see that the legal documentation and systematic presentation of evidence had made it impossible for them to dismiss my concerns as emotional overreaction. By the end of the conversation, I had established clear boundaries. No sharing of my business information without explicit permission. No use of my work for academic or professional purposes, and no treatment of my intellectual property as family assets. I also required written acknowledgments of the violations and commitments to respect my ownership of my work going forward. The consequences were immediate and lasting. My family's casual appropriation of my work stopped completely, but so did much of their casual interest in my activities. The legal formality I'd introduced into our family. Relationships had created distance that couldn't be easily bridged, but I protected what I'd built, established my boundaries, and made it clear that my work belonged to me alone. The $3 million acquisition had given me the credibility to demand respect. The evidence I compiled had given me the leverage to enforce it. The truth about my family's intellectual property theft was now in the open, and the consequences both, legal and relational, were clear. What remained to be seen was whether we could rebuild family relationships based on genuine respect rather than casual appropriation. 6 months after the TechCorp acquisition, I was sitting in my new apartment in downtown Minneapolis, looking out at the city skyline while reviewing applications for the Parker Innovation Fund, the foundation I'd established to support young entrepreneurs whose ideas had been dismissed or overlooked by traditional support systems. The apartment was a deliberate choice, modern, minimalist, and entirely mine. After 19 years of living in a childhood bedroom where my most important work had been invisible to my family, I wanted a space that reflected who I'd become rather than who they'd assumed I was. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the dedicated office space, the meeting area where I could host other entrepreneurs, everything was designed to support the professional life I was building. My post-acquisition life had been a whirlwind of financial planning, investment decisions, and strategic thinking about my future. The $3.2 million had been carefully allocated, a substantial emergency fund, diversified investments managed by a financial advisor who specialized in young tech entrepreneurs, and significant funding for the Parker Innovation Fund. I'd also set aside money for a new startup I was considering. Though I was taking my time to identify the right opportunity, the Parker Innovation Fund had become my passion project. The application I was currently reviewing was from a 16-year-old in Seattle who developed an app that helped students with learning disabilities organize their coursework. Her parents had dismissed it as not a real career path and were pressuring her to focus on traditional academic subjects. Her story felt achingly familiar. "Dear Madison," her application letter began, "I heard about your foundation through a blog post about supporting young innovators. My app has helped over 500 students improve their academic performance, but my family thinks I should focus on realistic career goals instead of playing around with technology. I don't need much funding, just enough to pay for better development tools and marketing to reach more students who could benefit from my work." I'd already decided to fund her project. The Parker Innovation Fund wasn't just about money. It provided mentorship, legal support for intellectual property protection, and connections to other young entrepreneurs who understood the unique challenges of building businesses. While family members questioned their choices, working with the fund had introduced me to dozens of brilliant young people whose innovations were being dismissed by adults who couldn't recognize non-traditional paths to success. A 17-year-old who'd created an app that helped elderly people manage medications, a 15-year-old who developed software that made online learning more accessible for students with visual impairments, a 14-year-old who'd built a platform that connected young inventors with mentors in their fields. Each story reinforced my understanding that dismissal of young innovation was a systemic problem, not just a quirk of my particular family. Across the country, teenagers were building solutions to real problems while being told to focus on homework. College applications and traditional career preparation taught my relationship with my family had evolved in complex ways since the confrontation about intellectual property theft. The legal boundaries I'd established had been respected. No one shared my business information anymore, and Jake had withdrawn his fraudulent presentation and issued corrections to his professors. But the emotional distance created by that process was harder to bridge. Sunday dinners had become awkward affairs where everyone was careful not to ask too many questions about my work. My family had swung from dismissive disregard to cautious over-respect, neither of which felt like genuine relationship. They were proud of my success now, but their pride felt conditional on external validation, rather than rooted in understanding of who I was or what I was trying to build. Jake had returned to college with a new appreciation for intellectual property rights and a grudging respect for what I'd accomplished. Our conversations were more careful now, but also more honest. He'd acknowledged that his appropriation of my work had been wrong, and he'd started asking permission before discussing anything related to my business activities. Emma had adjusted her college essays and application materials to remove the misrepresentations about family collaboration, and she'd begun showing genuine interest in entrepreneurship. She'd even asked if I'd mentor her in developing her own business ideas, a request I'd accepted cautiously, with clear boundaries about intellectual property and attribution. My parents had struggled the most with the new dynamic. They'd built their parenting approach around providing guidance and oversight, and my financial independence had made their traditional role largely irrelevant. Dad had started asking for my advice about technology investments for his accounting firm. Mom had begun referring friends to me when they had questions about their own children's tech interests. The reversal was gratifying, but also sometimes uncomfortable. I didn't want my family's respect to be based solely on my financial success. But I also wasn't willing to return to the dismissive dynamic that had characterized our relationships for so many years. My mentor, Sarah Kim, had become an increasingly important part of my professional life. We met monthly to discuss business strategy, investment opportunities, and the challenges of being a young entrepreneur in a world designed for older, more traditional business owners. She'd introduced me to other successful founders who'd started young, creating a peer network that my family couldn't provide. The hardest part of early success, Sarah had told me during our most recent conversation, is learning to trust your own judgment when everyone around you suddenly wants to offer advice. Your family means well, but they're trying to guide someone whose experience has already surpassed their own. That insight had helped me navigate the new family dynamics with more patience. My parents weren't being malicious when they offered business advice I didn't need. They were trying to maintain a parental relationship with someone whose professional capabilities had evolved beyond their experience. The tech corp relationship had also developed in positive ways. I'd accepted their offer to remain involved with Focus Flow's development as a consultant, and I was learning about scaling consumer software at enterprise levels. The experience was providing valuable insights for my next venture, whatever that might be. But perhaps the most significant change was in how I thought about success and recognition. The acquisition had provided external validation that my family's early dismissal had been wrong, but working with other young entrepreneurs through the Parker Innovation Fund had taught me that external validation wasn't necessary for innovation to have value. The 16-year-old in Seattle whose application I was reviewing didn't need her parents' approval for her app to help students with learning disabilities. The 17-year-old who developed medication management software didn't need adult recognition for his work to improve elderly care. Their innovations had intrinsic value that existed independent of family support or traditional acknowledgement. That realization had been liberating. I no longer needed my family to understand my work for it to be worthwhile. I no longer needed their approval for my choices to be valid. I could appreciate their belated pride, while recognizing that it had come too late to influence the fundamental relationship between my sense of self-worth and their opinion of my capabilities. Looking out at the Minneapolis skyline from my new apartment, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the money in my bank account. I'd built something valuable, protected it from people who would have diminished it, and was now using my resources to help others whose innovations were being similarly dismissed. The Parker Innovation Fund was becoming exactly what I'd hoped, a bridge between young innovators and the recognition their work deserved. It was proof that success could create positive change beyond just personal financial security. My phone buzzed with a text message from the 16-year-old in Seattle. Just got your approval email for the Parker Innovation Fund grant. I'm crying happy tears. Thank you for believing in my work when my family can't see its value yet. I smiled, remembering exactly how that feeling of being unseen and undervalued had shaped my own journey. But now I was in a position to ensure that other young entrepreneurs didn't have to navigate that isolation alone. The foundation I was building, both literal and metaphorical, was strong enough to support not just my own future, but the futures of dozens of other young innovators whose families didn't yet understand what they were capable of creating. A year after the TechCorp acquisition, I was 20 years old and preparing to speak at a conference for young entrepreneurs. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was being introduced as a successful tech founder to an audience of teenagers and college students, many of whom were probably dealing with family skepticism about their own non-traditional career paths. The letter I'd written for the conference program would be published alongside my keynote speech, but it felt more like a message to my younger self than advice for strangers. I titled it, A Letter to Dismissed Innovators, and it contained everything I wish someone had told me when I was 14 years old, coding alone in my bedroom while my family worried about my future. Dear young entrepreneur, the letter began. If you're reading this, you're probably building something that the adults in your life don't understand. You might be 14, 16, or 18 years old, creating solutions to real problems while being told to focus on practical pursuits. You might be earning money from your innovations while being lectured about the importance of traditional education and conventional career paths. Writing those words brought back the isolation I felt during those early years, the disconnect between what I was accomplishing and what my family could see, the frustration of being dismissed as unfocused when I was actually more focused than anyone realized. The first thing I want you to know, the letter continued, is that your age doesn't diminish the value of your work. If you're solving real problems for real people, your innovations matter regardless of whether the adults around you recognize their significance. User feedback, revenue generation, and market validation are more reliable measures of success than family approval or academic credentials. The Parker Innovation Fund had grown beyond my initial expectations. In 12 months, we'd funded 43 young entrepreneurs across the country, providing not just financial support, but mentorship, legal guidance, and connections to other innovative teenagers. The stories that emerged from our funded projects were extraordinary. Apps that had improved thousands of lives, businesses that had generated substantial revenue, innovations that had attracted attention from major companies. But more importantly, we created a community where young entrepreneurs could find the recognition and support their families couldn't provide. Monthly video calls connected funded entrepreneurs across different states and industries, allowing them to share challenges, celebrate successes, and learn from each other's experiences. The second thing I want you to know, my letter continued, is that family dismissal often stems from fear and misunderstanding rather than malice. Parents and siblings who question your choices aren't necessarily trying to undermine your success. They're often trying to protect you from what they see as risky, uncertain paths, but protection that prevents you from pursuing your strengths isn't actually protective. My own family relationships had continued evolving throughout the year. The formal boundaries I'd established had created space for more genuine interactions, though the dynamic remained different than it had been before the acquisition. My parents had gradually begun asking for my opinion on business decisions, recognizing that my experience had given me insights they lacked. Jake had developed a genuine interest in entrepreneurship, though he was careful to build his own knowledge base rather than appropriating mine. Emma had started a small online business selling vintage clothing, and she'd asked me to help her understand e-commerce best practices. The success of my younger siblings had created an interesting shift in family dynamics. Instead of being the overlooked middle child, I'd become something like an informal family business advisor. The role felt strange but satisfying, finally being recognized for expertise I developed rather than dismissed for choices they didn't understand. Third, my letter went on, protect your intellectual property from the beginning. Document your work, timestamp your innovations, and be cautious about sharing proprietary information even with family members. Well-meaning relatives often don't understand that casual conversation about your business ideas can compromise your competitive advantages. This advice came directly from my experience with family intellectual property theft, but it had been reinforced by similar stories from other young entrepreneurs. The Parker Innovation Fund now included intellectual property education and legal support as standard components of our mentorship program, helping young innovators protect their work before problems arose. Fourth, build relationships with other entrepreneurs who understand your journey. Family support is valuable when it's available, but peer support from people who've navigated similar challenges is often more practical and encouraging. The entrepreneurship community I discovered through conferences, online forums, and mentorship relationships had provided something my family couldn't: genuine understanding of the specific challenges facing young business owners. These relationships had taught me that success without family approval was not just possible but relatively common among entrepreneurs who'd started young. Finally, my letter concluded, remember that proving your worth to skeptical family members isn't your primary objective. Your goal should be building something valuable, solving problems that matter to you, and creating positive impact through your work. External validation, including family recognition, is a bonus, not a requirement for your innovations to have meaning. Looking back on my journey from dismissed teenager to successful entrepreneur, I could see how each challenge had contributed to my current capabilities. The years of working in isolation had taught me self-reliance and independent decision-making. The family dismissal had motivated me to prove my worth through results, rather than just promises. The intellectual property theft had educated me about business protection and legal rights. Even the painful confrontations have been necessary for establishing the boundaries that now allowed for healthier family relationships. The TechCorp acquisition had been transformative, but not just because of the money. The external recognition had given me confidence to trust my own judgment and resist others' attempts to diminish my work. The financial independence had provided freedom to pursue projects that mattered to me rather than ones that would impress skeptical relatives. My current business ventures reflected that freedom. In addition to the Parker Innovation Fund, I was developing a new app focused on helping young entrepreneurs connect with mentors and resources. I was also exploring investment opportunities in other startups founded by people under 25, using my acquisition experience to identify promising companies that might benefit from early-stage funding. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of my current life was the letters I received from Parker Innovation Fund recipients. Young entrepreneurs who'd been able to quit part-time jobs and focus on their businesses because of our funding. Teenagers who'd gained family respect. After their funded projects achieved success. Students who'd chosen entrepreneurship over traditional college paths because they'd seen it was possible to build something significant at a young age. Madison, one recent letter had read, "Your fund didn't just provide money for my app development, it provided proof that someone believed my work was worth investing in." That belief helped me convince my parents that my business wasn't just a hobby, and now they're actually proud of what I'm building. Those letters reminded me why the dismissal I'd experienced had been so painful, but also why overcoming it had been so important. Young innovators needed more than just technical skills and good ideas. They needed recognition that their work had value, support for their unconventional paths, and protection for their intellectual property. The conference keynote I was preparing would be my opportunity to share these insights with a larger audience, but the real impact would come through the ongoing work of the Parker Innovation Fund and the community. We were building around young entrepreneurship. At 20 years old, I had financial security that would last a lifetime, a growing reputation in the tech industry, and family relationships that had been rebuilt on foundations of mutual respect rather than dismissive assumptions. But more importantly, I had a clear sense of purpose that extended beyond my own success. The teenager who coded alone in her bedroom, dismissed by family and motivated by the desire to prove them wrong, had evolved into someone whose primary goal was ensuring that other young innovators didn't have to navigate that journey in isolation. My family had been wrong about my potential, but their wrongness had inadvertently taught me something valuable. External validation, while gratifying, wasn't necessary for meaningful work. The apps I built had helped thousands of users regardless of whether my family understood their value. The business I'd grown had created real economic impact independent of their approval. That lesson had become the foundation of everything I was building now: support systems that recognized young innovation on its own merits, without requiring family approval or traditional credentials. The Parker Innovation Fund was proof that dismissed ideas could become transformative businesses when given appropriate support and recognition. As I finished preparing for the conference, I realized that my story had come full circle. The dismissal that had once felt like rejection had actually been preparation for the work I was meant to do, helping other young entrepreneurs transform their dismissed ideas into recognized innovations. The family who'd once worried about my future can now see that I've been building it all along.